The attic was bitter cold that October morning, even though the furnace had kicked on twice during the night. Daniel Hargrove stood motionless, a faint trail of his breath curling in the air as if the house itself were exhaling secrets. Dust floated through the shafts of light slicing in through the warped wooden slats. He didn't know what had drawn him up here, just a restlessness in his gut, like something had shifted inside the walls, or under them. He was the last Hargrove, at least in Renfield. The others had either moved on, or more commonly, died. Most of them, disturbingly, on the same date, October 14th. A weak floorboard groaned under his boots as he reached for an old chest buried beneath moth-eaten quilts and rusting gardening tools. Its iron clasp resisted, creaking open only after he wedged it with a screwdriver. Inside, a leather-bound journal lay wrapped in yellowed linen. The name on the first page written in steady cursive, Clara Hargrove, 1921. The entries began mundane, weather notes, harvest yields, petty complaints about her brothers. But then came October 14th. Mother passed in her sleep last night. Her face was peaceful. William swears he heard the bell chime once before midnight, though the clock's been broken for years. I think the orchard knew first. Daniel turned the page. The next year, same date. Jonas, the stable boy, was found in the creek. No bruises, no water in his lungs. He was just there, eyes wide open. William has taken to prayer. I've taken to the cellar. I don't know which offers more comfort. Year after year, always October 14th. A mother, a worker, a cousin, a dog, even a newborn child in 1943. The ink became shakier with time, but Clara kept writing, kept documenting, and always with the same haunting final line. Another year, another loss. October 14th does not forgive. Daniel closed the book, his fingers trembling. He looked out the small attic window. The orchard stretched far, shadows curling between the trees like fingers. Something in his chest pulled, fear or gravity he couldn't tell. Tomorrow was October 14th, and this house had been waiting. If stories like this pull you in, if you want more real family secrets and dark legacies uncovered piece by piece, subscribe now. There's so much more beneath the surface, and you won't want to miss what we find next. Daniel didn't believe in curses. He didn't believe in ghosts or family hexes or blood debts passed through generations, but he did believe in patterns. And this one was undeniable. Clara's journal wasn't the rambling of a madwoman. It was meticulous, documented over 60 years, each entry carrying the same weight, the same cadence of dread. The clock downstairs chimed once. Noon. His skin went cold. He hadn't noticed how long he'd been up here. He slid the journal into his coat and made his way down the narrow steps, each creak a whisper. Back in the living room, the air felt heavier. The old portraits on the wall seemed to stare with new intensity. His great-grandfather Elias, unsmiling, his eyes hollow. Daniel had seen that portrait 1,000 times, but now it felt different. He sat at the old writing desk, placing Clara's journal beside a stack of unpaid bills and yellowed envelopes. The house was falling apart. The land was overgrown, and yet something deeper was rotting here, something ancient, something that began long before Clara, before Elias, before even the house itself. He knew what he had to do. There were records, letters, a church that once stood on the edge of the property, stories the town no longer told. He would start there, because if October 14th came for him next, he wanted to know why. And maybe, just maybe, he could stop it. The land had always been generous to the Hargrove family. Acres of fertile soil, thick groves of sugar maple, and a freshwater spring that never ran dry, not even in the harshest droughts. When Elias Hargrove first settled in Renfield in 1850, the townspeople said God had smiled on him. They didn't know how right or how wrong they were. Daniel flipped through the brittle pages of a family Bible, its leather binding flaking in his hands. Names, birthdates, marriages. It read more like an archive than a sacred text. The Hargrove line stretched back through generations with only brief notes marking the losses. Josephine, 1921. William, 1931. Henry, 1943. Always October 14th. But it didn't start there. He found a deed tucked behind the last page, dated August 1850, signed by Elias himself. It granted him nearly 200 acres of untouched forest and farmland, purchased for what seemed even then a suspiciously low sum. The ink bled slightly at the corners, but one word stood out: Renfield Parish witnessed. A pastor had co-signed. The Hargrove estate, a grand two-story farmhouse with wraparound porches and gabled windows, had once been the pride of the region. Elias became a figure of influence quickly, donating to the town hall, helping build the church, even funding the first schoolhouse. His name was etched into cornerstones across Renfield, and for decades the family was respected, even admired, but not loved. Stories began to trickle in during the late 1800s, hushed whispers about how Elias never aged, how his orchard bloomed weeks before the rest of the county, how anyone who crossed him seemed to meet early misfortune, and how, each fall, as the leaves turned, at least one person tied to the family would vanish, become ill, or suffer accidental death. Daniel reread a letter from 1873, penned by a woman named Margaret Yates. She had worked as a nursemaid on the estate and described the household as cold, despite its beauty. "They don't mourn here," she wrote. "When someone dies, the house simply absorbs it. There is no grief, only silence. Despite the deaths, the land prospered. Corn grew tall and sweet. The orchard bore apples as red as rubies. The cattle never fell ill. But the family itself grew thinner with each generation. Children lost young, mothers dying in childbirth, accidents that never made sense. Still, no one left. It wasn't loyalty, Daniel suspected now, but fear. Something kept them here, something older than the trees. And it began with Elias. There were no photographs of the patriarch, only paintings. He was always depicted the same way: tall, solemn, dark eyes that seemed too large for his face. A man of the soil, yes, but also a man of secrets. Daniel stared at one oil portrait in the hallway, where Elias sat stiffly, one hand resting on an open book, the other gripping the armrest like it was holding him to the earth. Who had painted that? And why did the orchard appear in the background, glowing like fire? The deeper Daniel dug, the more he felt the weight of the house pressing down. Every creak of the floorboards sounded deliberate. Every gust of wind outside carried a whisper. He wasn't just studying history, he was living inside it, and it didn't want to be disturbed. Still, he needed answers. The names in the Bible, the records in the attic, even Clara's journal, they all pointed to something unspoken, something held together by silence and blood. He circled the name Elias and wrote beside it, "Start here." Because if Elias brought the curse, then maybe understanding him was the first step toward breaking it, or at the very least surviving it. Autumn came early that year. By the second week of October, frost kissed the edges of the orchard, and the sky hung low with an unspoken tension. The Hargrove household moved slower, spoke less. Even the servants, usually quick-footed and chatty in the mornings, tread softly, as if the walls themselves were listening. On October 14th, Josephine Hargrove was found dead in her bed. Clara was the first to see her. She had brought tea, as she did every morning, but the air in the room felt different, too still. Her mother's face was pale, eyes half open, mouth slightly parted. The teacup slipped from Clara's fingers, shattering on the hardwood. No scream came, only silence. The family doctor, summoned within the hour, found no cause, no illness, no trauma. He scribbled natural causes on the certificate and left without taking questions. Clara wanted answers. William, the eldest, only muttered, "She was tired." That night, the bell over the orchard gate rang once. No one had touched it. Josephine's death fractured the family in ways that would never fully mend. William assumed control of the estate with cold efficiency. He dismissed half the staff, cancelled all business meetings, and ordered the family chapel sealed until spring. Thomas, the youngest, drowned himself in whiskey, retreating to the barn where he claimed to see Josephine's ghost standing among the apple trees. Clara wrote. Her journal became her companion, her confessor. In careful strokes, she chronicled each whisper in the hall, Each shadow that lingered too long, each time she woke at 3:12 a.m., the time the clock had stopped the morning Josephine died. But the house wasn't mourning. It breathed. The air grew thick. Doors refused to stay shut. The mirrors in the west wing fogged without reason. Clara noticed the dog, Grendel, refusing to go near Josephine's room. Birds stopped nesting in the eaves. One servant claimed to see lights in the orchard after midnight. She left the next day, refusing her final pay. And then there was Emily. Only 9 years old, Thomas's daughter, bright and full of questions. She saw something in the orchard that same week. She didn't have words for it, only a drawing. Black figures under the trees, arms like smoke, mouths open. She said they were waiting. Clara burned the sketch. The family met that evening under William's instruction. They sat at the long dining table, where Josephine's seat remained empty but untouched. William spoke without emotion. "We do not indulge hysteria," he said. "Mother was old, things happen. This family survives by order, not superstition." But Clara saw his hands tremble. Later that night, Thomas came to her room, reeking of brandy, eyes red. "He knows something," he whispered. "He always has. I found letters, Clara. From Mother. From the pastor." "What letters?" "I can't show you. Not yet." Then he was gone, disappearing into the barn, leaving behind the echo of a truth too dangerous to hold in the open. Clara stood by the window and watched the orchard. The trees were still. No wind, no birdsong, just silence like a breath being held. October 14th had taken their mother. It would not be the last time. The first letter arrived 2 weeks after Josephine's burial, sealed in brittle wax and addressed to Clara in a trembling hand. The sender, Reverend Marcus Ellery, former pastor of Renfield Parish. The church had closed decades earlier, shuttered after a fire gutted its southern wing. No one ever spoke of it anymore. Clara read the letter 3 times before hiding it in her drawer beneath a silk handkerchief. The words crawled off the page like vines. "Miss Hargrove, I do not write out of habit, but out of fear. Your mother came to me often in her final years, not for scripture, but for confession. She believed what your great-grandfather did in 1863 still clings to the family like damp rot. There was blood, Clara. There was an oath. The orchard bears more than fruit. Please do not ignore the dates. Do not sleep near the trees." Clara stared at the fireplace long after the flames had died. She couldn't bring herself to burn the letter. Downstairs, William was entertaining a business associate from Cleveland. Clara watched from the staircase as laughter echoed through the parlor. He wore a smile too large, too forced, as if trying to convince himself more than the guest. Thomas hadn't come in from the barn in days. Clara waited until midnight and crept outside. The orchard loomed in silence, the moonlight falling like bruises on the ground. She walked the path where Emily claimed to have seen the shadowy figures. At the far edge, the trees parted around an old stone marker, cracked and half sunk into the earth. She hadn't noticed it before. No inscription, just an inverted cross carved faintly into the surface, like a warning long forgotten. A cold wind passed through her spine. The next morning, the Hargroves' youngest servant, Lewis, failed to report to the kitchen. They found him hours later, slumped beneath the orchard gate, eyes wide open. No wounds, no pulse. The doctor muttered something about sudden cardiac arrest, but Clara saw the mark on his palm, an old burn scar shaped like a circle with a line through it. Emily screamed when she saw it. "It touched him," she cried. "It touched him like it touched the dog." William silenced her with a sharp glare. Clara turned to the only place left untouched by her brother's indifference, her mother's old jewelry box. Among the brooches and lace gloves was a folded parchment, stained with something too dark to be ink. It held a sketch, a crude map of the estate, symbols marking the orchard, the barn, the well. At the bottom, scrawled in a hand that was not Josephine's, "The root is older than the house, older than the name." That night, she searched the attic and found another letter, this one unsigned, tucked between hymnals and a wedding photograph. It spoke of a pact made in harvest blood, of 13 seasons balanced by sacrifice. The dates mentioned all aligned with deaths from previous generations. October 14th wasn't just coincidence. It was part of something structured. Clara began to catalogue them. The first entry in her new journal, Lewis Whitaker, 1922, no cause of death. October 14th. She tried to show William. He refused to read it. "You'll bring madness into this house," he snapped. "We are not them, Clara. We are not bound to ghosts and old earth." But she saw the fear behind his certainty. She saw how he no longer walked near the orchard, how he crossed himself before opening the cellar door. In her dreams, Clara saw her mother at the edge of the orchard, face hollow, lips moving without sound. Each time she awoke, the bell over the gate rang once. October was only beginning, and the ground was stirring. Clara no longer slept through the night. The air inside the house had thickened, like breathing through cloth. She stayed awake long after the others had gone to bed, poring over letters, maps, and cryptic notations in the margins of family Bibles. Her obsession no longer felt like fear. It was duty. If she didn't uncover the truth, who would? William had sealed himself in routines. Thomas was falling deeper into the bottle, and Emily. Emily was whispering to things that weren't there. The map from Josephine's jewelry box remained spread across Clara's desk. Symbols surrounded the orchard. Triangles, loops, a six-pointed star burned into the corner. At first they meant nothing, but the old parish records, retrieved from the ruins of Renfield's church, hinted at something darker. The term appeared again and again in the handwritten ledgers, Autumn Pact. The earliest reference was dated October 1863, the same year Elias returned from the war. According to the record, he came home injured but wealthy, too wealthy. He made large donations, funded town repairs, purchased land from 3 neighboring farms without negotiation. The pastor's journal described his eyes as hollow but burning. And in one passage, the most disturbing yet, he made a covenant beneath the blood moon, in the orchard he planted by hand. The cost was set. The pattern was born. Clara closed the book, hands trembling. She stared at her mother's portrait above the fireplace. "What did you do?" she whispered. As October 14th neared again, the house became a shadow of itself. The orchard trees bore fruit too soon, heavy apples that dropped with sickening thuds. Grendel, once a fearless animal, now refused to leave the parlor. Servants walked out quietly, one by one, without notice or explanation. William retreated into accounting books and letters from Cleveland. "I don't have time for nightmares," he told Clara. "There's a harvest to manage." "There's a blood debt," Clara snapped. "And you know it." He slammed his fist against the desk. "No more talk of pacts or curses." "You sound like Thomas." But Thomas had gone silent. He hadn't left the barn in 2 days. Clara found him asleep on a pile of hay, face bruised, lips moving in a prayer she didn't recognize. When she woke him, he grabbed her wrist. "They're under the trees," he whispered. "The ground remembers. It remembers every name." That night, William saw her in the study, surrounded by papers and candlelight. "What are you hoping to find?" he asked from the doorway. "Proof, a key, a way to end this." "It's just death, Clara. That's all it's ever been." "No," she said. "It's a design." William looked away, his voice suddenly soft. "Then maybe it's better we don't know the architect." But Clara did want to know. She had to, because the pattern had already begun again. The lights flickered every night at the same hour. The mirrors in Josephine's room fogged and cleared without touch, and Emily kept asking strange questions about the well behind the orchard, about the lady in grey who watched her from the trees. In her journal, Clara wrote, "If the pact began in 1863 and the pattern holds, then the next loss is due in 2 nights. I fear it will not wait until morning." She circled a name, Thomas. Then just beneath it she added one more, me. The candle sputtered, the orchard rustled, and Clara knew something had awakened. It began with war. Elias Hargrove left for the Union Army in the spring of 1861, a young farmer with more ambition than means. Renfield saw him off with prayers and songs. By the end of 1863 he returned, not broken like the others, but stronger, not richer by salary, but by something no one could explain. He carried no wounds. He spoke little, and his eyes had changed. The official story was simple. Elias had inherited from a fallen officer, a cousin by marriage who left him land and coin. But those who had known Elias before said something in him had died out there, and something else had taken its place. Clara read the journal entries from Reverend Ellery aloud, barely able to keep her voice steady. The words were etched in faded ink, brittle with age, but still pulsing with dread. He came to me one October night, asked not for prayer, but for absolution. Spoke of a ritual he performed with 2 others, a ritual that bound their blood to the harvest. He used terms I dare not repeat, but he believed it had worked. The next spring, his crops grew twice their yield, his cattle doubled, but he knew, even then, there was a cost. I asked what was given in exchange. He would not answer. Only looked toward the orchard and said, "It will know when to collect." The words chilled Clara more than any ghost, because the orchard was the only thing that had never faltered in the history of the estate. When others in Wrenfield lost crops to frost or drought, the Hargroves harvested in abundance. When livestock fell sick elsewhere, theirs grew fat and calm. And always, every year, someone died. Not always family, not always staff, but always close, always tied to the house, and always on October 14th. Thomas sat beside her, paler now, thinner. He hadn't spoken since the last dream, only stared into the fire with blank eyes. But when she mentioned the date, he flinched. "I saw him," he muttered, "in the orchard, digging. His hands were black. The roots moved. You were dreaming, Thomas." "I wasn't asleep." She pressed the letter from the pastor into his hands. "This is what he did. Elias made a pact. He fed it something." Thomas ran his fingers over the paper. "Then we've been feeding it ever since." Outside, the wind shifted. Clara continued reading. The journal's last entry was dated 1864, just before Ellery resigned from the church and disappeared. "The orchard is older than him, older than the war. I believe he only awakened it. The earth was already waiting. He made a covenant in desperation. Now it marks the line, generation by generation. If one is not taken, another will be. If none are offered, 2 will fall." Clara's heart pounded. It wasn't just punishment. It was a system, a design with rules. She scoured Elias's old ledgers, looking for any sign of regret, but found only numbers, harvest logs, and cryptic annotations beside the October dates, symbols matching those on the map. A circle, a broken branch, a flame. Then one word, bind. Clara stepped outside just after midnight. The orchard stood still. Not a single leaf moved, but she heard it, a low hum beneath the soil like breath rising from the roots. She whispered to the wind, "We know now. We know what he did." The trees didn't answer. They didn't need to. The pact had been written in blood, and it would not be undone with knowledge alone. It would take something more. The first to run was William. In 1931, 10 years after Josephine's death, he boarded the Cleveland Express with only a suitcase and a forged letter of resignation from the family estate. He told no one except a stable hand who swore William said, "I'll take my chances with the living." He didn't make it to Cleveland. The derailment occurred at 6:14 p.m. October 14th. Investigators blamed mechanical failure, though witnesses described no visible issue before the sharp turn. The train had been traveling slower than usual, and yet 5 cars flew off the rails like pulled by something unseen. William's body was the only one untouched, not a scratch, but his eyes were wide open. Clara received the telegram 2 days later. She read it alone, then tucked it into her journal beneath a fresh entry. "It does not accept escape. Even distance cannot sever the root." Thomas didn't speak for days afterward. He simply paced the edge of the orchard, fingers twitching, lips dry. Clara saw the toll written across his face. He was aging faster, haunted by things he never admitted seeing. The family shrank again. No new servants came. The fields were tended by hired men from neighboring towns who never stayed past dusk. The Hargrove name lost its shine in Wrenfield. People stopped waving, stopped asking about the farm. The family was a ghost, occupying space and time, but no longer part of either. Clara remained inside, reading. The church record spoke of seasonal tithes. and her notes grew more erratic with each year. She mapped the orchard by moon phases, tracked animal behavior, recorded dreams in the margins of her letters. In 1935, Thomas brought a girl home from Dayton. Agnes, bright-eyed and unworried by the house's stillness. They married in spring. By summer, she was pregnant. Clara wept with cautious joy. But Agnes lost the child on October 14th. She never recovered. The doctor called it a late spontaneous abortion. Clara called it payment. Thomas fell apart after that. He refused to enter the orchard. At night, he slept beside the fireplace, clutching a shotgun. He claimed he saw Josephine again, this time not at peace but whispering, pointing to the west side of the orchard, where the apples grew darkest. Agnes left the following spring. No letter, no goodbye. By 1939, the estate was a ruin of silences. Paint peeled, windows cracked, vines crept into the foundation like veins. Clara kept a daily journal, each page more desperate. She had marked 17 deaths, family and others, all with ties to the land, all on the same cursed date. And yet the orchard thrived. Each year the apples were richer, the soil darker. A professor from Columbus once asked to study the crop, impressed by the yield. Clara never replied. She knew what grew there wasn't meant for markets. Then came the dream. October 13th, 1940. She saw Elias again, younger than his portraits, standing at the center of the orchard. Blood soaked his hands. Around him, 12 figures, faceless and still, forming a circle. At his feet, a child's body. He looked up and spoke one word. Balance. Clara woke screaming. The bell outside rang once. In the morning, Grendel was gone. Found dead at the base of the stone marker Clara had discovered years earlier. No wounds, just stillness. She added him to the list. That evening she wrote, "It no longer waits for us to act. It remembers who we are. Even the animals are known. Even the air obeys." There were no more questions left to ask, only the next October to endure. By 1981, the house stood alone like a mausoleum of memory. Peeling paint curled from the window frames like old skin, and the roof sagged beneath the weight of time. Daniel had inherited it in silence, no ceremony, no final will, just a letter from a distant lawyer and a key wrapped in wax paper. He hadn't come back to Renfield for the orchard. He came for answers. The attic had offered him Clara's journal, but it wasn't enough. There were too many gaps, too many questions layered between the lines. He began searching the house with a careful, almost reverent persistence. Every drawer, every crevice, every loose floorboard held the possibility of a secret. Then he found the door. It was behind a heavy bookshelf in the east wing, a section of the house long unused and sealed since before he was born. The wallpaper had bubbled, the plaster cracked with age. The bookshelf slid aside only after he noticed scratch marks on the floor beneath it, grooves from years of being moved and always put back. The door itself was unpainted wood, smooth and cold. No knob, just a simple latch, rusted and stiff. When it opened, the air that escaped smelled like dirt, and something older, something almost sweet. Inside was a small room, windowless, silent, lined with shelves. And it was hers. Clara's archive. Dozens of journals, meticulously dated, filled the left side. On the right, photographs pinned to corkboards, some labelled, others blank. Every image captured something near the orchard, shadows that didn't align with the light, silhouettes at dusk, faces reflected in the house's windows where no one stood. The center of the room held a table. On it, a map of the property hand-drawn in thick charcoal, with dozens of red pins dotting the land. Daniel recognized the barn, the creek, the well. But most pins surrounded the orchard, forming a spiral that tightened toward a single point marked with a black X. Beside the map lay a list, names, dates, some crossed out, some circled. His father's name, Henry, was among them. Daniel's breath caught. He remembered very little about Henry. A photograph, a coat, the smell of tobacco. He'd died in the war, they said. But here, in Clara's handwriting, were details no child had ever been told. Shot by friendly fire, October 14, 1943. Odd position of entry. No external cause for collapse. Army buried it. Daniel sat down slowly, heart thudding in his ears. He reached for the journal labeled 1943-1945 and flipped to the entry. Henry didn't belong to this war. The land found him where the bullets could not. It took him because we tried to forget. I begged the earth, it did not listen. Each word pressed heavier than the last. He turned to the photographs. One caught his eye, black and white, taken at night, the orchard in the distance. In the center, barely visible, was a figure, long dress, arms outstretched, no face. Clara had written on the back, October 14th, 1943. She watched him fall. Daniel stared at the image until his vision blurred. He had come looking for history. What he found was design, pattern, purpose. The deaths were not random. The land did not forget. And now, standing in the quiet of Clara's forbidden room, he understood what she had tried to build. Not a sanctuary, but a warning. The orchard was no longer just a place. It was a mouth. And the Hargroves had been feeding it for over a century. By 1943, the Hargrove name was thinning like old parchment. Clara, now well into her 40s, had become a ghost inside her own home, observing, recording, never intervening. The house no longer responded to the rhythms of the living. It pulsed to the beat of a memory far older. When the telegram came, it was expected. Henry Hargrove, son of Thomas, was declared dead in France. Official cause, accidental fire during a training exercise. But the date told Clara everything she needed to know, October 14th. She placed the telegram beside her journal entry for that day. The land reaches farther now. Distance is no protection. I see the roots in my dreams, stretching, twitching like nerves. Henry ran and the soil still found him. Thomas didn't take the news well. He smashed every mirror in the house and screamed at walls until his voice broke. When Clara found him in the barn, surrounded by empty bottles and the lingering stench of hay and blood, he whispered only one thing. It tricked me. Clara knew what he meant. In the months leading to Henry's deployment, Thomas had grown hopeful. Agnes had written from Georgia. They'd spoken of reconciliation. Clara saw a faint light return to her brother's face, but now, crushed under the weight of grief and guilt, he vanished into silence. Within a year, Thomas wandered off into the orchard during a thunderstorm. They found his coat by the marker stone, nothing else. Clara added his name to the list. By 1945, she was alone. The estate reflected that solitude. Curtains never opened, clocks stopped ticking. The orchard bloomed early again, unnaturally so, with fruit the size of fists. No birds nested nearby. Animals passed wide around its edges, even the strays that once roamed the fields. The town of Renfield had moved on. The last grocer who delivered to the Hargrove house stopped coming after seeing Clara standing at the gate in the rain, holding an old photograph like a crucifix. Children whispered about the orchard witch, and teenagers dared each other to steal apples after dark. None tried twice. Inside, Clara clung to her journals. They became her family. Pages filled with names, drawings, symbols. She stopped writing in pen and began using charcoal, scratching directly into the walls of the hidden room. Spirals, circles, branches. She marked each death with a line drawn down the length of the attic beam. There were 19. The 20th came without warning. A child from the village, 10 years old, disappeared on October 14, 1951. He had dared himself to run the orchard trail at midnight. His body was never found, but Clara woke that morning to the sound of weeping near the front porch. When she opened the door, there was no one there, only a small shoe, wet with dew. She added his name to the list. The house rotted with grace, walls softened with mold, floorboards warped from beneath. The roof curled inward like a closing eye, and the orchard, unchanged, stood untouched by time, fed by something that no longer required permission. Clara never spoke to another soul. The last known letter from her hand, dated 1955, was never sent. Daniel would find it years later, tucked behind a loose brick in the hearth. To whoever remains, I write not for absolution, but for clarity. The pact was never broken because it cannot be broken. It must be fulfilled. One name every year. If none are given, the land chooses. We thought we inherited a house. What we inherited was a debt, and it is not yet paid. Daniel, reading that letter in 1981, felt a chill pass through him. October was approaching again, and he was the last Hargrove left. Daniel left the house for the first time in weeks. He drove into Renfield just after noon, the sky heavy with grey. The town hadn't changed much since his childhood visits. Same two-lane road, same rusted signage, same creaking general store with a bell that rang half a second too late. But the people had changed, or maybe they had always been this way. He asked simple questions about his family, the orchard, the deaths. No one answered. Mrs. Ellison at the bakery offered a tight smile and a loaf of bread she insisted was on the house, then turned and disappeared into the back. The grocer muttered something about closing early. At the library, the attendant didn't even look up from his desk. He just handed Daniel a slip of paper with a name written on it, E. L. Morse. Daniel found him at the edge of town. Eldred L. Morse had once been a schoolteacher, long retired, now half-blind and nearly deaf, but sharper than anyone had warned. He sat in a rocking chair on a crooked porch, surrounded by dead plants and empty bird cages. "You're Hargrove, then?" he asked even before Daniel gave his name. "I am. Didn't think one of you would come back not this close to the date." "I didn't come to die," Morse snorted. "That's not up to you." Daniel told him what he'd found. Clara's room, the journals, the photographs, the letters. Morse listened with a blank expression, nodding only once. "They told us to forget," he said. "Told us it was nonsense, but we remembered, the children knew. We used to walk the long way to school just to avoid the fence line." "What is it?" Daniel asked. "A promise made too deep in the ground to ever pull up. Elias didn't create the curse. He just gave it permission. That land's been wrong since before Renfield was named, before the war. Before even the first foundation was laid. Then why stay?" Morse leaned forward, eyes gleaming. "Because people like stories. And Renfield had a great one. A blessed family. A bountiful orchard. We ate your apples, Daniel. We toasted with your cider. We celebrated your births and your weddings. But we never dug too deep because we knew what we'd find." Daniel said nothing. Morse stood with effort, shuffled inside, and returned with a wrapped bundle. It was a book, old, cracked, bound in rawhide. "Take it," he said. "It's called The Harvest Bloodline. No author, no publisher. It's older than I am, and smarter than anyone who's read it. If you're going to end this, if you can end this, you'll need to understand it first." Daniel drove back in silence. That night, he read until the oil lamp guttered low. The book was written in fragments, passages stitched together from folklore, rural myth, pagan rites. But one section chilled him. The bloodline that binds the land must balance life with loss. Each year, at the edge of harvest, one shall be taken. If denied, the land chooses. If interrupted, the roots double back. To sever the chain, the final heir must willingly offer blood. Only that gift, freely given, can tilt the soil towards silence. Daniel closed the book with shaking hands. Clara had known. Elias had feared. The town had hidden. But none of them had tried. And now the orchard waited, the air shifted. The air. It wasn't a dramatic change, no thunderclaps or howling wind, but something subtle like a breath held too long. The orchard stood motionless, the trees almost statuesque under the pale sky. Daniel noticed how the leaves didn't fall. They remained unnaturally vibrant for mid-October, as if the trees themselves refused to decay. Inside the house, the silence turned oppressive. Footsteps echoed longer, floorboards groaned louder, and every evening at precisely 6:14 p.m. the lights flickered, just once, enough to be noticed, never enough to explain. Daniel began dreaming, not of people, but of roots. He saw them twist and reach, growing through floorboards, splitting walls, threading into his veins. In the dreams, he was buried beneath the orchard, not dead, but listening. Always listening, and above him the trees whispered secrets in voices that sounded like his ancestors. He marked the days on the wall with charcoal: 10, 9, 8. On the 7th day before October 14th, he heard the bell ring. Once, no wind, no visitor, no mistake. He returned to Clara's room, searching for something he might have missed. There, behind her final journal, was a torn envelope. Inside, a brittle map and a note in shaky ink. Marked graves. Do not dig. Let the pattern die in silence. You are not meant to wake what sleeps beneath. Daniel stared at the map. 6 graves marked around the orchard, and a 7th at its center beneath the tree with the blackened trunk. He traced the spiral drawn around them, then looked up at the corkboard. One photo stood out now, dated 1955, taken from the second-floor landing. The orchard was barely visible in the background, but there was something in the lower left corner. A figure, kneeling, digging. He turned the photo over. Clara had written, "He tried." Daniel studied the names on the map. He recognized only 2, Thomas and Henry. The others had no surnames, just first names, handwritten in block letters: Isaac, Miriam, Samuel, Faith. He didn't know if they were servants, family, or something else entirely. The next night, the dreams changed. Now he saw Elias standing at the orchard's edge, cloak soaked in red, holding a branch like a staff. Behind him, a dozen shadowed figures bowed low to the earth. Elias turned slowly, opened his mouth, and Daniel woke with blood on his tongue. He didn't know if he'd bitten himself, or if it was something else. The bell rang again. He opened the harvest bloodline and read the passage over and over. The final heir must willingly offer blood. But what did that mean? Sacrifice? A ritual? Death? No. He wasn't ready to accept that. He circled the words, willingly offer. Daniel returned to the orchard during daylight, shovel in hand. The trees seemed to recoil as he walked between them. Birds watched from far off. At the marked center, the earth was soft, as if waiting. He didn't dig, not yet. Instead, he placed a small offering, a locket that had belonged to his mother, filled with soil from the Hargrove graveyard. He whispered, "I know you're listening." And then the ground vibrated. Just slightly, just enough to let him know he'd been heard. That evening the lights flickered again. At 6:14 p.m., then again at 6:15. Daniel stared at the bulb above him as it dimmed, then flared to life. The clock on the wall froze mid-tick. He marked the day, 3 left. And he knew October 14th was already reaching for him. October 13th arrived, cloaked in silence. Daniel hadn't left the house in 2 days. The winds outside shifted constantly, never loud, but persistent, like breath drawn through teeth. The orchard had begun to glow faintly under moonlight, its leaves catching silver in ways that didn't feel natural. The blackened tree at the center seemed to pulse now, its bark glistening with sap, too dark to reflect the stars. That morning, Daniel unearthed the lockbox. It was where Clara's map said it would be, beneath the loose floorboard in the study, marked with a faint etching of a broken branch. The box was iron, sealed with 2 rusted latches and wrapped in cloth that crumbled at his touch. Inside, papers, thick with age and mold, a dried flower, and a final confession, signed in the careful, trembling hand of Elias Hargrove. "This pact was mine," Daniel read, his breath caught in his chest. "I made it to protect what I had built. In the smoke of war and the hunger of dying men, I turned to an older voice, one that spoke through earth and stone and root. I offered the land what it craved, blood, one name once a year. In return, the orchard would feed, the house would stand. The line would prosper. The next page was stained with brown ink, or maybe something else. I thought I could control it, but it grew beyond me. I tried to break it. October 14th, 1869, I denied it. I stayed in the orchard all night. I recited the rites backward. I burned the black apple. The next morning 2 bodies were found, a child and a servant, neither meant to die. But the land must balance. If one is not offered, it takes more." Daniel's hands trembled as he turned the final page. I left warnings. I built boundaries. But the pact is not with me. It is with the bloodline. And so it continues. Daniel stared at the confession until the ink swam before his eyes. He had wanted clarity. Now he had prophecy. The pattern would not end on its own. And Clara. Clara had known all of this. She had followed every thread, uncovered every truth, and still chose silence, not out of cowardice, but calculation. Daniel saw it now. She believed no one would believe, that to reveal the truth would invite more death. And so she built her room, her records, her warnings, quiet, hidden, waiting for him, because the final heir had to choose. The book had been clear. Only blood willingly given can tilt the soil toward silence. The pact would not be broken with ritual or fire. It would end only when the land was satisfied with the final price, his own. The orchard swayed in the wind, though no wind touched the house. Daniel closed the box, heart pounding. He walked through each room of the estate that day, not as a ghost hunter or a skeptic, but as a man cataloguing his final hours. The piano in the parlor, the cracked mirror above the hearth, the bedroom where Clara once slept with a crucifix in her palm. In the attic, the journal remained open on the last page. He added one more line, "I know what I am. And I know what I must do." That night he did not sleep. Instead, he sat by the orchard gate, watching the black tree as it pulsed beneath the moonlight. October 14th would arrive, with or without his consent. The only question that remained was whether he would walk to it freely or be pulled. The morning came without birdsong. Daniel awoke before sunrise, though he couldn't recall sleeping. The silence outside was complete, not peaceful but suffocating. The orchard loomed in the distance, shrouded in mist, the blackened tree at its center darker than ever. Every instinct told him not to go near it. He tried the phone. Dead. The line hummed with static, then silence. He opened the front door. The road was gone. Not physically. Still paved, still familiar. But something in the air warped the horizon. No wind, no movement, no sound. Even the clouds above seemed frozen, stretched across the sky like torn fabric. He stepped outside, and the house groaned behind him. A deep wood-on-wood shudder that rattled the porch beams. He returned inside and locked the door. The clock struck 6:14 a.m. One chime. Then another. Then a long, slow ring that echoed through the walls like a bell at sea. He made tea. Ate nothing. Sat in the parlor as the light changed colors through the stained glass windows. Time crawled like sap. Every hour he marked the wall with chalk, his fingers shaking slightly more each time. Noon. The lights flickered. A gust of warm air blew through the house, though no windows were open. The attic door swung open on its own. Footsteps echoed above. Not quick, not loud, but unmistakable. Daniel didn't move. At 2 p.m., he read Clara's final journal entry again. Her handwriting faltered on the last page, but the meaning was clear. He must choose to break the line, or continue it. He understood now. To walk freely into the orchard would end it. To resist would feed it. But if he fled, if he tried to vanish like William, like Henry, it would take others. Maybe many. The land didn't negotiate. The black tree was not a relic. It was a root, a heart, the covenant's anchor. And Daniel, blood of Elias, was its final beat. By forecast p.m., the house felt smaller. The ceilings dipped lower. The walls creaked with pressure. Shadows moved where they shouldn't. A knock came from inside the fireplace, then from behind the piano, then from beneath the floorboards. He didn't answer. He stood at the window and watched the orchard. The mist thickened now, curling like fingers. Shapes moved within it, tall, thin, still, not walking, not floating, just appearing. As if the trees had grown watchers. At 5 p.m. he lit every candle he could find. He gathered the items, the lockbox, the confession, the journals, the locket, placed them in a satchel, slung it over his shoulder like a soldier heading to a war no one believed in. And then, just as the clock prepared to chime again, he heard it, a voice. Not spoken aloud, but inside his chest, vibrating through bone. It called his name. Once, then silence. Daniel sat at the desk and wrote one final note. If this is found, know that I chose to walk, not to die, to end. This is not a curse. It is a contract, and someone has to tear it in half. He folded the note and placed it inside Clara's final journal. At 5:59 p.m., he walked to the door. He placed his hand on the handle and waited. The bell outside rang once, then twice. The door unlatched without his touch, and Daniel stepped outside. Daniel crossed the threshold, and the world changed. The orchard no longer looked like trees. It looked like figures standing in rows, motionless but alert. The mist clung to the ground, waist-high and warm, humming against his legs with each step. Every breath he took carried the scent of apples and rot, sweetness soured by age and memory. The blackened tree at the center pulled him like gravity. Around it, 6 mounds circled the base, graves, untouched and shallow. He recognized the names Clara had written, though no stones marked them. The ground pulsed faintly, like the beat of a second heart. He stepped into the center, and they came. One by one, figures emerged from the mist. Clara, Thomas, William, Agnes, Henry, even Josephine. They did not speak. Their eyes held no judgment, only expectation. Behind them, others appeared, people Daniel had never seen, but somehow recognized. Ancestors, witnesses, victims. The orchard was full now, shoulder to shoulder, a congregation of silence. Daniel dropped the satchel at his feet. Removed the locket, the journals, the confession. "I brought the truth," he said. "All of it." The wind responded, not with howling but with breath, warm and deep, the kind of exhale that comes after centuries of waiting. He took the final step forward and placed his hand on the black tree. It was warm. He drew the knife from his pocket. Not ancient, not ceremonial, just steel, the kind that cuts. With one swift motion, he sliced his palm and pressed it to the bark. Blood dripped into the grain, vanishing as quickly as it fell. The ground trembled, the wind stopped, and the orchard moved. Not the branches, not the leaves, but the soil itself. It shifted downward, sinking slowly, drawing Daniel to his knees. He did not resist. He closed his eyes. And the voices came. Not words, tones, echoes. The sounds of every October 14th reaching back to Elias, back to whatever stood before him. It filled Daniel's chest, his spine, his skull. Then, silence. He opened his eyes. The figures were gone. The orchard was empty. The mist cleared. The graves remained. But the tree was changing. The black bark cracked. From within, light glowed, soft, amber, like sunset through stained glass. The trunk split with a sound like thunder and wind in chorus. From its heart, sap poured in long golden strands. The smell of rot was gone. Daniel stood. He felt lighter, though his hand still bled. The wound no longer hurt. The orchard no longer breathed. He turned back toward the house, and the path was open. The trees bowed slightly as he passed. The sky cleared overhead, stars visible even through the thinning clouds. For the first time in weeks the moon appeared, white and full, watching from above without menace. He reached the porch and looked back. The black tree was no longer black. It was grey, silent, still. And around it, no shapes moved. The orchard had gone quiet. Daniel stepped inside, the door closing behind him with a gentle creak. He washed his hand in the old basin, wrapped it in linen, and sat by the fireplace. He waited. No bell, no flicker, no voice. The land had taken his blood, not his life. It had accepted the offering. The pact was broken, or fulfilled. He would not know which until the next October. But tonight, for the first time in over a century, no one died. Morning arrived not with dread, but with quiet. Daniel stepped outside and felt warmth on his skin. Not imagined, not ghostly, real warmth. The sun had broken through the clouds for the first time in days. The orchard no longer hummed beneath his feet. The trees stood still, their leaves fluttering in a normal breeze, not one summoned by something deeper. The blackened tree was now grey and lifeless. Bark flaked from its trunk, and the pulsing core of the night before had gone cold. The ground around it was still untouched. No graves disturbed, no shapes in the mist, no tolling bell. Daniel walked to the edge of the orchard and looked out across the field. It was quiet in a way he had never known before. No tension, no weight pressing down on his lungs, just silence. Honest, clean, unburdened. Inside the house, the air had changed. Lighter. The floors creaked without menace. The lights no longer flickered at 6:14. The mirror in the hallway reflected only what was real. Daniel returned to Clara's room. He opened the final journal and wrote in the last blank space, October 14th, 1981. The orchard slept. No one died. He closed the book. He packed the journals, the map, the lockbox, the confession, every piece of the story, every truth uncovered, and sealed them inside a trunk with thick leather straps. He placed it in the attic, beneath the same quilts that once hid Clara's first record. Then he locked the attic door. He spent one last night in the house. The wind outside was soft, the moon bright. His hand, still wrapped in linen, ached only slightly. He didn't dream that night, he simply slept. At dawn he dressed, loaded the car, and stood once more on the front porch. He looked out over the land, the house, the field, the trees. It no longer felt like a prison, it no longer felt like a tomb. It felt empty, the way it should. He left the gate open. No message, no marker. Let the orchard rest. Let the name fade. As he drove away from Renfield, the road stretched clear before him. No static in the air, no bending horizon. The town looked the same as it always had, but now he saw it for what it truly was. A place that had lived beside horror for too long and called it tradition. He didn't stop, didn't need to. He was free. Somewhere along the highway, he saw a line of trees, ordinary ones, maple, birch, none blackened, none watching. They bent slightly in the breeze, rustling like pages turning in a book. He smiled. The legacy was over. The Hargrove name would end with him. Not with death, but with silence, with peace, no graves, no rituals, just an end. As he merged onto the next road, the radio finally crackled to life. A simple song, clear, undistorted. And with it came a voice from a station far away. It's a beautiful day today, the warmest we've seen in October in years. He let the voice fade behind the music, and he drove, far from Renfield, far from the orchard, far from the route, but never forgetting. Because some stories deserve to end and some bloodlines deserve to sleep. If this story gripped you like it gripped generations of the Hargrove family, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more true stories wrapped in mystery and legacy. And now, click on the video on your screen to uncover the next chilling tale waiting just beneath the surface.